Hello, Imaginers. My name is Kyla Martin, and I coach you to the career and life that you imagined. And on this week's episode, I want to talk to you a little bit about what I'm calling COVID brain, pandemic brain. I was watching a documentary on Netflix called Coronavirus Explained. And in the third episode, they were talking about what is going on with our brains right now that we're actually experiencing a pandemic. And as someone who is fascinated and uses a lot of brain work and brain understanding in her coaching practice, I, of course, was so excited to learn more about what was actually happening to our brain during this time. And fundamentally, what is happening during a crisis, which is not surprising, is that our brain goes into full fight or flight mode. So you know what this feels like. It's the same feeling you get in the middle of the night when the phone rings and wakes you up. Your heart starts racing, your adrenaline is pumping, cortisol is being created in your body. Your oxygen levels actually decrease because we tend to breathe faster. And so you can imagine what this does for our decision making. And in the already overwhelming time of a pandemic, if our decisions are affected by being in this fight or flight, which all lives in the lowest part of our brain, not the highest part of our brain, you can imagine that we're probably not making the best decisions. And I've certainly experienced this in my own life. I find myself being more forgetful. I find myself having being a little bit more clumsy even. And I attribute a lot of this to, again, being in fight or flight. So if we think about how we were biologically driven to survive, we are driven to actually continue living versus thriving. So our thriving lives in the highest part of our brain. Our actually survival mechanisms live in the lowest part of our brain. And this is why we're still here after these many years when there were so many threats and risk. And so on the road to your life imagined, I want you to think this week about, are you in lower brain or are you in higher brain? And the way that you'll know is if you can be planning for your future, thinking about your future, but also being present in today. When we're in fight or flight, we tend to be more focused on just getting through the day, and we'll say things like, I can't even cope with what's coming next. I can't think about tomorrow. I want to wait until all of this is over and we go back to normal before I make any decisions. And that's really being in COVID brain, what I'm calling COVID brain. And so I want you to think about, if you're being driven by the lowest part of your brain, are you making decisions that are going to serve you in the next year? I talked a little bit in a previous video about how I'm using this next year as, I'm calling it my gap year. And it's a year I'm never going to get back. It's going to be a year that is going to be doing some things that I wouldn't otherwise do. And I want to look at that as a positive. So stay tuned on the next episode. I'm going to talk about COVID plans. But again, back to COVID brain. So we're wired to survive. We are going to be focused on what's called the motivational triad, which is we want to avoid pain, seek pleasure, and be efficient. And I talk about this a lot in my videos, but it's why it feels so great to lie on the sofa and binge watch TV, ideally with some food. You can imagine that as seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, and being efficient, right? We don't have to expend any energy. And back in the day, expending energy could determine whether you survived or not. It could determine whether, if something was chasing you, you could actually outrun it. So we are driven to be efficient. But again, being efficient, seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, oftentimes does not serve our long-term interest. So I want you to think about, it's a year from now. It is July in 2021. What do you want to have done in the last year? If you ask your future self, it can be helpful to write a letter to your future self and date it July 2021. And think about what you would want your future self to know. Would you want your future self to be avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, being efficient? Or would you want your future self to remind you that a year from now, the things that you started now, the small steps that you taken today are going to ensure that you're closer to the career and the life that you imagined? And again, I'm going to talk in the next episode about COVID plans, and part of that are going to be the myriad of opportunities that are available because of this pandemic. But for now, I want you to begin observing over the next week when you are in lower brain, when you kind of have an urge almost to, I just want to lay on the couch, I just want to watch some TV, I just want to eat some food. That's lower brain. And again, we're wired for that. So we want to be kind when that is happening and just identify when it's happening. But we also want to question some of that time. And is that time better spent in higher brain, which is where all of our long-term interests lie? Think about this as you are going through the next week, and consider writing your future self a letter and telling her what you want her to know. Because I promise, if you write the letter from your future self, you will stay in that upper brain where all of that goodness lies, all of the possibility lies, and you can get yourself out of COVID brain for at least a brief period of time. As always, I'm here to help you in any way I can. Check out my website at Kyla Martin Consulting for free resources, including a free session with me if you'd like to learn more about taking this work to a deeper level. As always, I'm cheering you on to the career and the life that you actually imagine living. Have a great week.